Today we are diving into a document that raises a disturbing question. How does a nation secure its very survival? By mastering the art of betrayal and weaponizing chaos.
Wow.
Welcome to a new Strategic Labs deep dive. Check the links in the description.
Glad to be here, as always.
So today we're really getting into the weeds of this book, Covert Operations Pakistan, Espionage, Nuclear Secrets, and the Shadow Wars Shaping a Nation by Edward H. Whitmore.
Yeah, it's a phenomenal piece of work.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is to explore the sheer paradoxes of Pakistan's intelligence apparatus.
Right, specifically the ISI, the Inter-Services Intelligence.
Exactly. We're trying to understand how a state that was basically born in total chaos managed to build this incredibly sophisticated, deeply contradictory system just to survive.
And survive is the key word there.
It is. But before we get any further, I do need to state very clearly right up front, we are looking at this strictly as an impartial exploration of the author's geopolitical analysis.
Right, we're entirely neutral here.
Totally. We're going to be talking about some highly sensitive regional conflicts today. We're talking about Pakistan, India, the United States, China.
A lot of moving parts.
Exactly. But we are not endorsing any political viewpoints. We're not taking sides. We're simply unpacking the factual content and the strategic frameworks that Whitmore presents in the text.
Yeah, we're just looking at the machinery of it all.
Right. And for you listening, understanding this sort of black box of intelligence, it really provides a masterclass in global geopolitics. It shows you exactly how nations operate when trust is actually a liability and, ambiguity is a weapon.
It completely flips traditional international relations theory on its head.
It really does.
Yeah.
So to start us off, let's look at the opening scenario from the book because it's like a microcosm of this whole shadow war.
Oh, the Midnight Intercept.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, so picture this. It's midnight in the ISI command center. The tension is just through the roof.
Very claustrophobic, compartmentalized environment.
Right, exactly. And they get this urgent intercept from the tribal regions near the Afghan border. But it's not clear. It's full of evasive code words.
Words like Scarlet and Ghost and Eagle.
Right, and these analysts have to piece together what this means. And what they realize is they are potentially looking at an unmarked convoy moving sensitive nuclear materials.
Which is pretty much the ultimate nightmare scenario for any state.
Oh, absolute nightmare. So you're the commanding officer, right? What do you do?
Well, you're instantly paralyzed. It's a paralyzing dilemma.
Because you can't just blow it up.
No. I mean, any unilateral kinetic action like a drone strike or sending in a raid team could trigger a border war with Afghanistan. Or, you might end up hitting your own deep cover assets who are just tracking the convoy.
Wait, really? They might accidentally kill their own spies?
Oh, absolutely. The compartmentalization is so intense that the left hand often doesn't know what the right hand is doing. And on top of that, there's the possibility that the entire intercept is a fake.
Like a trap.
Exactly. A manufactured piece of intelligence by a rival agency just to see how the ISI reacts.
It's like playing 3D chess in a pitch-black room where every piece might be wired to explode.
That is a perfect way to put it.
And what's crazy to me is, why not just call for help? Like, why not pick up the phone and ask the CIA for satellite imagery?
Because in their operational doctrine, relying on the CIA exposes a critical vulnerability. The CIA isn't seen as a friendly partner in this context.
Right, they're seen as competitors.
Yes, highly capable competitors operating inside their borders. If the ISI admits they lost track of nuclear material, they hand the U.S. a massive justification to expand American surveillance inside Pakistan.
Which undermines their own authority.
Completely. So they're dealing with this incomplete, totally contradictory information, and they essentially have to handle it in the dark.
Which is just terribly ironic.
Yeah.
Because the whole point of getting these nuclear deterrents was to ensure the survival of the state, right?
The ultimate shield.
And suddenly, the very weapons designed to keep them safe become their greatest source of existential panic.
Exactly. The solution becomes the problem.
So to understand why the ISI operates on this razor's edge, like why they have to make these impossible choices in the dark, we really have to go back to how the nation was born.
Yeah, the birth of Pakistan in 1947 is fundamental to all of this.
Let's get into that, the partition. Because the book makes it clear this wasn't a peaceful transition of power.
Not at all. It was birthed in literal blood and chaos.
We're talking massive displacement. Millions of people moving across borders almost overnight.
And the violence was unprecedented. You had trains full of refugees being halted by mobs and just, well, completely slaughtered.
Just horrific stuff.
Yeah.
And in the middle of all this, The new leadership has zero governmental infrastructure, like no administrative backbone,
None. They had to rely entirely on what was left over from the British Raj.
which is basically just the intelligence networks and the military, right?
Exactly. And Whitmore points out that secrecy and intelligence gathering, in that specific moment in 1947, they weren't choices. They were literally the only tools available to stop the immediate collapse of the state.
Wow.
Yeah. Transparency was seen as a massive liability. If you showed weakness, you were done. So the ISI's first mandate wasn't about some grand political design. It was just a raw, desperate need to impose order on a society that was fracturing in real time.
So control basically became synonymous with survival.
Exactly. Control was survival.
But I mean, did this initial reliance on the shadows doom the country to this permanent state of paranoia?
Well, the trauma of 1947 etched this permanent paranoia right into their strategic DNA.
Right, but at what point does a temporary emergency measure, because that's what it was, right?
Right.
At what point does that become a permanent toxic culture?
That's the million-dollar question. Because every single threat that comes after 1947 is viewed through that exact same lens. They're always afraid of national disintegration.
So they just never let their guard down, even when things stabilize.
Never. The reliance on the shadows didn't fade at all.
It actually seems like the shadow apparatus realized it needed to control the light, too.
Yeah.
Which leads us to how they morphed from just being spies into being actual kingmakers.
Yes. The shift from an advisory body to essentially a shadow state within the state.
And the catalyst for that was really the 1971 war, right?
Absolutely. 1971 is the major turning point. That's when East Pakistan seceded and became Bangladesh.
Right. Which was a massive loss for them.
Devastating. They lost half their country. And the military and intelligence establishment realized that to prevent that from ever happening again, they needed absolute control over everything.
So they started infiltrating the civilian bureaucracy.
Right. Vetting political appointments, controlling media narratives, you name it.
There's this one specific example in the book that blew my mind. The outspoken cabinet minister.
Oh, yes. That's a perfect illustration.
So this minister starts raising concerns about excessive military influence, right? He's trying to push back.
And he's totally within his democratic rights to do so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But within days, literally days,
Right.
the ISI orchestrates this massive invisible campaign against him.
No assassinations, no public arrests.
Right, just leaks,
Yeah.
rumors, whisper campaigns, and it entirely destroys his political relevance. He's just gone from the board.
And they justify all of this using this incredibly opaque shorthand, national interest.
National interest. Right.
Yeah, it's a catch-all term. The intelligence apparatus essentially cultivates this narrative of a perpetual existential threat to justify overriding normal democratic cycles.
It's so fascinating. It reminds me of a rogue immune system.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah, like think about it. You have an intelligence apparatus that was designed to protect the body politic, right?
Right, to fight off external diseases.
Exactly. But eventually, it gets so paranoid and so overactive that it starts attacking the civilian organs it was meant to defend.
The white blood cells attacking the heart.
Precisely.
Right.
But once they secured all that internal control, they still had to deal with the outside world, an increasingly hostile region.
Right. India on one side, Afghanistan on the other.
So they had to shift their entire operational philosophy outward.
Which brings us to their preemptive logic. Striking first in the shadows.
Yeah, the book talks about how they went from reactive intelligence, just, gathering info and waiting, to highly proactive covert operations.
Because the calculus was brutal. They decided that waiting to respond to a threat invites destruction.
So you have to hit them before they hit you.
Exactly. Disrupt adversaries like India's Ra before any plots can even mature.
But the trade-offs there are just terrifying.
Oh, absolutely terrible trade-offs. Because you're acting on worst-case assumptions, usually with highly fragmented intelligence.
Right, you don't even know for sure if the threat is real.
And by striking preemptively, you often end up stoking the exact cycles of retaliation you're trying to prevent.
It guarantees perpetual crisis.
It does. It keeps the region permanently destabilized.
Like that internal crisis mentioned in the text, where they had this murky intelligence about an internal plot.
The one timed with the diplomatic visit.
Yes. A major foreign diplomat is visiting, and the ISI gets a tip about a plot.
And rather than monitoring it to see if it's real, they just launch these rapid, brutal detentions.
Total media blackouts, just
Right.
shutting everything down.
Because they prioritize immediate state security over everything else. Civil liberties, international reputation, none of it matters.
But wait, let me push back on this a bit. If every preemptive strike risks sparking a wider war, Aren't they basically just trading the mere possibility of a future threat for the absolute certainty of an immediate conflict?
Mathematically, yes.
So how do they justify that gamble?
Because in their minds, the worst-case scenario of inaction is the complete dissolution of Pakistan. So they will gladly accept a guaranteed low-level crisis today if it prevents a hypothetical total annihilation tomorrow.
Wow. That is a grim way to run a country.
Very grim. But it logically extends to their ultimate preemptive tool.
The nuclear arsenal.
Exactly. The lengths they went to acquire and guard the ultimate deterrent.
We have to talk about this because the espionage involved here is just wild.
It really is. They were incredibly desperate to build a nuclear program to counter India.
Because they knew they couldn't win a conventional war.
Right. But they didn't have the domestic technology to do it, so they used deep espionage. They infiltrated foreign research centers in Europe to steal the enrichment processes.
Stealing missile guidance systems, cryptographic codes, you name it.
And it wasn't just stealing, it was the counterintelligence tactics they used to protect the program while they were building it.
Yeah, the book mentions they had operatives trained by the KGB and NATO.
Oh, yeah. They were running incredibly sophisticated misdirection campaigns. They would intentionally spread rumors that their tests were canceled.
Or leak completely false blueprints to throw people off the scent.
Creating phantom organizations to misdirect the CIA, the Mossad, RA.
Just a massive global shell game.
Exactly. But once they actually got the bomb, it fundamentally changed the doctrine. It introduced full-spectrum deterrence.
Which is another massive paradox.
It is, because nuclear weapons prevent conventional war, right? They threaten total annihilation.
Right. Nobody wants to start World War III.
But ironically, that exact threat opens the door for continuous, low-intensity proxy wars.
Because both sides are too terrified to actually escalate to a real war.
Precisely.
It's like two people standing in a room full of gasoline, and they're both holding lit matches.
I love this analogy.
Right. Because they hate each other, but they can't throw a punch, because if they drop a match, they both blow up.
Right. Mutual assured destruction.
So instead of throwing a punch, they just stand there and kick each other in the shins under the table.
Yes. Kicking under the table is the perfect description of proxy warfare.
And to make sure you get away with it, you have to rely on a really counterintuitive strategy.
Weaponizing ambiguity.
Right. Making absolutely sure your enemy never quite knows what you're doing.
So we're talking about strategic ambiguity. This is where Pakistan intentionally sends contradictory signals.
Like they'll publicly deny something while doing the exact opposite in the shadows?
Exactly. The prime example is Kashmir. On the world stage, Pakistan publicly denies any support for militant groups there.
But covertly.
Covertly, they utilize those exact groups as strategic assets.
Right, because clarity is a liability for them.
Exactly. If India knows exactly what Pakistan is doing, India can formulate a precise counter-strategy. But ambiguity frustrates enemy calculations.
It's plausible deniability. It allows Pakistan to project power, tie down Indian forces in Kashmir without ever crossing the threshold into a formal war.
And we're seeing this exact same logic extend into cyberspace now.
Oh, absolutely. Cyber warfare is like the ultimate version of this.
Because it allows for perfect, plausible deniability.
Right, you can hack a power grid or run a disinformation campaign and just say, hey, it wasn't us, it was some rogue hacker.
Exactly. Letting Pakistan challenge adversaries digitally while entirely dodging international censure.
But, I have to ask. It sounds brilliant in theory, like a great tactical move. But when you institutionalize lying, when you are lying to your enemies, your allies, and your own people on a daily basis, doesn't the state eventually lose its grip on what is actually true?
That is the internal rot of the system, yes.
Right. Because how can you trust anyone in your own government?
You can't. And that institutionalized deception leads directly to what is arguably the most fraught relationship of all.
The double game.
The double game, the triangular dynamic with the United States and China.
This is where things get incredibly complicated. Because Pakistan is basically caught in a vice.
A very tight vice. You have the U.S. on one side, aggressively demanding counterterrorism cooperation, especially after 9/11.
Right. And then you have China, which is this emerging economic and military ally for them.
And of course, India, the perennial existential threat right on their border.
So they have to balance all of this. And the climax of this whole dynamic, the part of the book that really just gripped me, was the Osama bin Laden raid in Abbottabad.
The ultimate breaking point.
Yeah. This unilateral CIA operation just completely shattered whatever fragile, suspicion-laden alliance existed between the U.S. and Pakistan.
Because they didn't tell the ISI they were coming.
Right. The U.S. just flew in, did the raid, and flew out.
Because the U.S. simply didn't trust them. They assumed the ISI would tip off bin Laden.
And from the outside, it looks like this massive betrayal by Pakistan, right? Harboring the most wanted man in the world while taking billions in U.S. aid.
But Whitmore reframes this concept of betrayal in the book.
How so?
Well, in the context of Pakistan's doctrine of strategic depth, betrayal isn't a moral failing. It's not about being evil. It is a highly calculated tool of statecraft.
So it's just business.
Exactly. They felt they had to cooperate with the U.S. to get the intelligence and the financial aid they desperately needed.
Right.
But simultaneously, they felt they had to covertly shield certain militant assets to maintain their leverage in the region, specifically in Afghanistan, for when the U.S. eventually left.
It's like a high-stakes game of poker. Like, imagine a poker table where literally everyone knows everyone else is cheating.
Right.
The U.S. knows Pakistan is cheating.
Right.
Pakistan knows the U.S. is cheating. But they all have to keep playing the game because leaving the table means losing everything.
That is exactly the dynamic. They were locked in a marriage of absolute convenience and utter paranoia.
So as we look at the fallout of this decades-long double game, we have to evaluate the ultimate toll this shadow war actually takes on the nation itself.
Which brings us to the ultimate paradox of the book.
The cost of survival.
Right. Whitmore's overarching thesis is that this kind of survival comes with a massive, almost unbearable cost.
Because the very strategies that kept them from collapsing are destroying them from the inside.
Exactly. The ambiguity, the preemption, the proxy wars, the constant betrayal, it creates a deeply corrosive environment.
It's perpetual paranoia.
And severe international isolation. It's a tragic irony.
It really is. By trying to avert a collapse through all these aggressive unilateral maneuvers, the ISI often accelerates the exact instability they're so terrified of.
Because the system they built actually requires constant crisis to justify its own power.
Right. If there's no threat, why do we need the ISI?
Exactly. So they end up trapping the nation in this endless loop of shadow wars.
And for you listening, when you look at global news now, having unpacked all of this, you really won't just see binary good guys and bad guys anymore.
No, it's never that simple.
Right. You'll see the agonizing, real-world trade-offs that intelligence agencies are making every single day when survival is literally the only metric of success.
It's a very dark, very complex reality.
It is. Which brings me to a final thought for you to mull over.
Oh, I'm ready.
So, in a world moving rapidly toward artificial intelligence, hypersurveillance, and open-source intelligence, the shadows are shrinking.
Very quick.
Right. If a state's entire architecture of survival is built on deception, ambiguity, and secrets, what happens when it becomes technologically impossible to keep a secret?
That is a terrifying question.
Does the shadow state collapse? Or does it plunge us into a new era of even darker, algorithmically generated illusions?
Wow.
We've reached the end of this analysis. If this added value, please like and subscribe to Strategic Labs. See you next time.